This episode of Harvey Brownstone Interviews is brought to you by the Harvey Brownstone Talk Show Blend Coffee, available at hollywoodblends.com. Everyone's saying it's the best coffee they've ever tasted. Why not give it a try and see for yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's guest is an award-winning author, acupuncturist, nutritional consultant, and expert in the animal-human health connection. Her best-selling book, entitled Dog as My Doctor, Cat as My Nurse, An Animal Lover's Guide to a Healthy, Happy Life, reveals how our loving bonds with our beloved cats and dogs positively impact every part of our well-being, mind, body, and spirit. She then produced two more books, Paws for the Good Stuff, A Dog Lover's Journal, and Paws for the Good Stuff, A Cat Lover's Journal. And now she's released an emotionally powerful and highly compelling book entitled Junkyard Girl, A Memoir of Ancestry, Family Secrets, and Second Chances. The book was triggered by the astonishing revelation by our guest in 2019 at the age of 57, when she discovered through a DNA test that she was not the biological child of the parents who raised her. Through the book, she shares the riveting and poignant account of her turbulent journey towards the ultimate understanding and acceptance of the true meaning of family, a sense of identity and belonging, and the discovery of forgiveness, healing, and self-affirmation. I'm delighted to welcome Carlyn Montes De Oca to our show. Carlyn, thank you so much for being here.
Harvey, it's such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Carlyn, you were raised by your mother, Mary, and your father, Vincent, and you had two brothers and a sister. And until you were 57 years old, you believed they were your biological family. And then in 2019, many years after your parents had both passed away, you submitted a DNA sample to ancestry.com. What made you decide to do that?
I was in one part curious and in another part just interested because my mother at a young age had told us we were part Jewish. And I was curious about that because raised as a Catholic, we always heard the Jewish people were the chosen people. So I wanted to be one of them. So I wanted to check my DNA, and I decided at age 57 to do that. And the other part was fun. Where could I be from? Maybe there's some kind of ancestry here. Maybe I'm part Viking, who knows?
The DNA test result came back saying that you were very closely related to someone named Martha Baptista, who turned out to be your half-sister. You had the same biological mother, Maria Gallegos, who was taken in by your parents when she was pregnant with you. And your parents, Mary and Vincent, ended up adopting you as a newborn baby, correct?
That is correct.
Did you ever find out who your birth father was?
No, and in my book is the journey. I had this urgent need to discover who I was, where did I come from, where do I belong? And after everything was said and done, I did not know who my birth father was, but I think I got just burned out on the whole quest for learning everything. So I never did find out, but I'm always on the lookout on Ancestry to see if anything should pop up.
Carlyn, you wrote that even as a child, you sensed that the family you grew up with was not your real family. In your book, you referred to it as unexplainable knowing. How could you tell that the parents who raised you were not your real parents?
Well, I didn't really know. I think as a young child, one, I was pretty unhappy in my childhood. My parents were very overprotective, and now I have a sense of why. They didn't want me to know this big secret that so many people in our family knew, but I did not. And also, Junkyard Girl, the name of the title of the book. You know, I was raised in, for all intents and purposes, a junkyard, and I just wanted to get away. I wanted to get away so badly. So I dreamed like maybe one day my real parents will come for me. And so I had this real desire. And on some level, I think I already knew to even have that desire, to have that knowing there was something, and there were a lot of clues around me. I just did not put them together.
Now, your parents had three other children, your sister Lily, your brother Ray, and your brother Art. All of them and all of your other relatives, including 63 first cousins, knew the truth that you were adopted. Why did no one in the family ever tell you?
Well, my parents were the matriarch and the patriarch of this giant extended family that not only was in the United States, that had immigrated to the United States, but also were in Mexico. And people really revered them. And as my cousin, who I asked all of my cousins, why didn't you tell me? Did you know? And I started making a joke about it, like, oh, I'm gonna, get you for not telling me. And he says, well, I'd rather have you do that than my aunt, because my mother had that much kind of power just in a look, just in a look. And everybody knew they were never going to cross that line.
Well, do you think it was difficult for your sister and two brothers to keep the secret of your true identity for all those years?
I've thought about that a lot. I've tried to come from their perspective. And what my sister repeatedly tells me, frankly, she tells me this on every single phone call. You're my sister. I don't care what happened. You are my sister. And I have felt that protective quality from her from day one. And I do believe that went into the background for them. And they just felt I was their sister, and that is all that mattered. And I do feel, though, that if you're carrying that, though, in your subconscious, it does have to weigh on you somewhat, even if you don't recognize that consciously.
I don't know if you can answer this question, but I need to ask you, what was more difficult to deal with? Finding out so late in life that you were adopted, or the fact that your entire family kept it a secret from you?
Finding out so late in life that I was adopted. Because my family, the thing is, I love them. No, I mean, they'd have to do something. This was pretty big, and it was a mistake. I do believe I should have been told from the get-go, from as a young child, as a lot of people who are experts now feel that when there are adoptions, the child should be told early on. I think that my family was, at first, they were protective. They were protective. They had seen, my parents had seen situations in Mexico where they grew up that were really bad. People treated adopted children, or children out of wedlock, I should say, very poorly, and they didn't want that for me. So I could see from their point of view how it would be. And it wasn't up to my cousins to really tell me that information. It was up to my immediate family.
When you connected with your biological half sister, Martha, you learned that your biological mother was still alive, receiving hospice care in a hospital in Chicago, and you went there to meet her. Tell us about that visit.
It's very surreal because I had only discovered 3 weeks before that I was adopted. That's how fast this happened. And suddenly I'm told this woman who's presumed dead is alive and in a state hospital in Chicago. So 3 weeks later, I go to meet her. And my first experience, one, I should say, she had dementia. So she wasn't even clear who Martha was, and that was the daughter she had raised. And I remember looking at her for the first time and thinking, still in my head, this is not possible. I was going through a lot of denial. This is not possible. I don't look at all like this woman. I look like me. She kind of looks Irish and like a little elf, So I thought, no, that it can't be. So because I couldn't communicate with her, and also she didn't want anybody to touch her or come near her, and I sort of did. I thought to myself, if I just touch her gently, maybe I'll feel this connection to the woman who gave birth to me. And I did when she wasn't looking. And then she finally saw me and kind of brushed me away. But I felt nothing. So it was a strange thing. And I still feel it strange that I feel no connection, or she's passed, but I did not feel any connection to her.
Well, you met her only once, a short while before she passed away. As you mentioned, she was in a state of advanced dementia, so you weren't really able to communicate with her. You wrote in your book that you were both disappointed and relieved that you weren't able to have a real conversation with her. Why were you relieved?
Perhaps it was because, one, this book I've written it the way it happened. I tried to be very honest, but I think if other factors were involved, if my parents were still alive, my adoptive parents were still alive, if my biological mother had actually had a conversation with me of some kind, I may have learned things that may have hurt. I mean, I already did learn from my cousins and my aunts some things my birth mother had said about me when I was a baby. And she did not want me whatsoever. Like, not even remotely did she want me. And that's fine. I mean, I'm an adult and I can handle that. But perhaps in that conversation, I may have realized just how much she didn't want me. I don't know. There may have been just more information. I still would have liked to have had it.
What do you think your parents would have thought about you finding out the truth about your identity?
Well, I think my father always wanted to tell me, but I believe that he did what my mother asked him to do, which was never to tell me. And I think my mother was never really the very talkative kind. So I imagine I might have found out and told her, and she would have said, okay, well, let's not talk about it anymore. And that's just how my mother rolled. And that would have been very hard for me. My father, I believe, would have had greater conversations with me about it. But I think that my parents were very hardworking people who had been through a lot and they wanted to move forward in life. And I think they would not have necessarily wanted me to write a book or talk about it at great length. I think they would have expected me to kind of buck it up and go forward.
I want to ask you now, Carlene, about your childhood and the parents who raised you, Vincent and Mary. You had a rather unusual childhood because your parents were hoarders. I think that's the only way to describe them. They were hoarders. And I assume that's why you called your book Junkyard Girl, right?
It's true. It is absolutely true. My mother was the hoarder, the queen hoarder on the inside. My father had his kingdom on the outside. And we lived on about an acre of land, and it was filled to the brim.
Well, there's a chapter in your book, Carlene, that I think a lot of people can relate to. When you were a kid, you invited two school friends, two sisters who came from a wealthy family to visit your home. Their mother terminated the visit when she saw your home and your surroundings. Tell me the emotional impact of that incident on your own sense of self esteem.
That was the first moment that I felt that the junkyard, which before had been a place where my dogs and I would roam around and find old things and have this incredible imaginary life there where like an old hubcap would be a shield and I'd find a stick and it'd be a sword and we'd go around the junkyard. That was the first time when I saw that woman look at me and then she looked at all of the things in our yard. That was the first time I thought I knew or I understood that I was different and that the junkyard was not an imaginary beautiful place. It was an awful place. And when she looked at me, I saw the same look in her eye, or at least I presumed it was the same look in her eye. And suddenly it was the first big feeling of shame I had about growing up in that area with my family.
Well, that was a really heartbreaking chapter because many of us can relate, perhaps not in exactly the same factual circumstances that was you went through, but certainly in other aspects of our parents or our home lives. You wrote a lot about your mother, Mary, and quite frankly, Carlene, I'm just going to say it, she comes across as quite severe and at times even heartless. There's a heartbreaking chapter in your book where you describe your mother's harsh reaction to you being upset that a pig that you had been playing with was going to be butchered. You said you realized at that moment that you had two mothers living inside one body, and you never knew which one would show up. What do you think made your mother behave that way?
I think a lot of what happens with parents and children is that we are raised by people who have probably even a harder life. So I see that a lot of the reactions my mother had were because of her own mother and her own upbringing. And my mother was not a hugely reflective person. I mean, she didn't have the time or she was working all the time. She had children to raise. She wasn't super reflective. I'm very reflective about me and how I react, but she didn't have those opportunities. And therefore, I think that she felt this is a harsh world and I'm going to make you tough so you can deal with it. And I think this is how she dealt with it. And now we would think, yeah, that's really harsh. That's really bad. But that's what she knew how to do. And that's what she tried to instill in all of us.
Did you think your mother's remoteness, which is a well known form of abandonment, had
Mhm.
something to do with the fact that you were adopted?
I can't really speak for her because she's not here, but sure, I've wondered about all of those questions. I do know that she loved children. She was harsh and she was tough, but that was her dream to have children of her own because she was told early on she couldn't. And so therefore this is how she dealt with that.
You were offered a sports scholarship for high school and your mother refused it. And she also stopped you from playing all sports. Why?
You know, Harvey, I don't know the answer to that. My mother would never really divulge a lot of her reasoning. It was really because I said so. And I think to myself, well, was it because the school was 30 minutes away and she was working and she felt it would be difficult for her to pick me up if I was involved in sports more? Because I love sports. I loved sports and I enjoyed playing and I played up until I got into high school and I stopped playing because she wouldn't allow it. But I don't know. I don't know if she wanted to keep me closer to home, again, with the idea that she was protecting me. I couldn't say.
One day in August 1979, as you were getting ready to go away for university, your mother said to you, Carlene, everything I've done is because I love you. You wrote in your book that to this day, you regret your reaction to that comment. How did you react and how do you wish you had reacted?
Well, when I became a teenager, my mother and I were at loggerheads. We were just butting heads continually. And I couldn't believe it when I got the opportunity to go away to school to Los Angeles, which was 2 hours away from where we lived. And I was just trying to toe the line everywhere. I was hoping nobody would take it back, that suddenly my parents wouldn't pull the rug out from under me and send me back. But then my mother, one day I was ironing, I remember, and she came up behind me and she had tears in her eyes and she said, everything I've done is because I love you. And I did not want to give it to her. I could feel myself just wanting to burst into tears, but I wasn't going to give it to her because she and I were just fighting all the time. And I said nothing. I just kept ironing my clothes. And what I wish I had done was to turn around and give her a hug.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think a lot of us have gone through moments like that, but we weren't mature enough to know how to do that. I hope you've forgiven yourself for that.
I've forgiven myself for everything, Harvey.
Good. That's what you should do.
Yes.
One day your mother told you, learn to hate. Hate can make you strong. That's how you survive this life. What did you make of that?
I was in a very vulnerable place when she had told me that. I had just been through a breakup and my heart was just raw. And when she said that, I get that she said that because of circumstances that she had been exposed to. And we were in Mexico at the time in a home that brought back a lot of memories. But I remember just wanting to distance myself because I felt that kind of advice was absolutely toxic. And I felt that in that vulnerable place I was in, that was going to seep in and anchor itself somewhere. So I remember just distancing myself and saying, that may be your way, and that may be the way that she survived life, as harsh as it was, but it can't be my way. That is not my way.
You know, in a way, she taught you how not to be.
I believe she did. Yes.
Carlene, when you met your birth mother, you were asked by her sister, Lena, whether you had forgiven your birth mother for giving you away as a baby. And you said, there's nothing to forgive. Tell me how you came to feel that way.
Well, as you said, my mother was very harsh, and sometimes you felt that she came off a little heartless. And yes, I'll agree that she was like that, but there were if it had not been for my mother, I don't know that I would be alive having this interview with you right now. My birth mother, the idea after I learned everything about how she had treated the children she kept, about her life, I was beyond grateful that my mother had met this stranger and said, I will raise your child. I mean, I was so grateful. So when she said, can you ever forgive her? I didn't feel the abandonment of her letting me go. I only felt the gratitude that I had the parents who raised me. So that's what I meant by there is nothing to forgive.
You're a remarkable human being, I have to tell you. You sent that DNA sample to ancestry.com when you were 57. Are there times, Carlyn, when you wish you had taken that DNA test much sooner?
Sure, I would have loved to have known. I mean, there weren't DNA tests when I was 5. So I always say this, I wanted to know sooner. I wanted to know sooner. But as I went through my life and thought about the times that I could have been told and what was going on in my life at the time, in some ways, I live in this duality. I wanted to know sooner, but I sometimes think this is the best time I could have learned that. Just because I've been through a lot, I feel that I now know who I am, and I weathered that storm. I wonder in my 20s and my 30s and my 40s, I might not have weathered it as well.
Well, after meeting your biological mother and your half sister Martha and your Aunt Lena, you decided to seek therapy. Why?
Well, for starters, I wanted to make sure that I had not just glossed over things because something like that is traumatic. It is trauma. It is a complete shakeup of your psyche. And I was going along, working on it and working on it in the ways that I knew how, but I wanted to make sure I was covering all my tracks and something hadn't seeped in that I wasn't being honest about or that I wasn't looking at. And I had gotten really sick, after all of this, sicker than I'd ever been in my adult life. So when I got better, I called up a therapist and I went in to see her. And I pretty much said, just look everywhere. Tell me, am I handling this? Is there something I haven't handled? What do I need to do?
Well, Carlyn, I'm not a therapist, and I don't know if this will make any sense, but has it ever occurred to you that given your mother's personality, had she told you when you were a child that you were adopted, it might not have been good for you because she would not have been able to help you deal with it appropriately? Does that make any sense?
1000% it makes sense. And this is why I always feel like maybe now is the best time because my mother wasn't a great conversationalist. She never asked me, how are you feeling, other than to know if I had the flu. My parents were not looking at me as an emotional or, looking at those layers and what needs to be nurtured and what needs to be looked at. They were looking at survival. How do we get through to the next day? So I believe it would have been really hard, and I may have come out with a few more problems than I did now.
So everything happens for a reason, don't you think?
I believe that. Now, that is my story. I know a lot of other people will feel differently about this, but I am grateful that my story played out the way it was. I do believe it was meant to happen in the way it happened.
Now, Carlyn, you've now published 4 books and you've won many awards for your writing. I know that your grade 7 English teacher, Mr. Warmel, told you that you would never be a writer. How does it feel to have proven him so wrong?
It feels so good. It also reminds me that when you're a kid, there's reasons you feel a desire. I always felt a desire to write. I always did. And I loved animals. I just never put 2 and 2 together until I became an adult. Now I write about animals and the animal-human bond. And so it feels very good for me. And if Mr. Wormel is still out there, I made it.
Well, you more than made it. You're a huge success. Look at everything you've achieved in your life: a university education, a highly successful career, a happy marriage. You've published 4 books. I can't resist asking you this. Are there times that you still feel like a junkyard girl deep down inside?
Well, it's funny you should say that. I feel that, and if anybody has a book, this is the power of writing a book can do. I feel since I put myself out there now, I'm not a junkyard girl. I am just who I am. I'm just Carlyn, and that is great for me. But the other day I was hiking and a lady yelled at me. She goes, "Hey, aren't you junkyard girl?" And I have to say, I just sort of felt a little bit of a pang. So obviously it may still be in there, and maybe it will always be in there, just not with the power it once had.
No, now it's with a kind of warm, nostalgic feeling, don't you think?
I believe it is. The junkyard now has gone back to swords and shields and all of this great stuff that I had with my imagination as a kid.
Well, Carlyn, I have only one more question for you, and it's this. There's an old saying that says, the truth shall set you free. Do you think that statement applies to you?
Absolutely 1000% applies to me. In fact, I'm always telling people, if you know a secret about me, just tell me. I need to know the truth, whether it's good, it's bad, it's indifferent. I need to know the truth, and that's just who I am. And I do believe it set me free completely.
Well, Carlyn, I want to tell you, your book has lingered on in my consciousness ever since I read it. I think it conveys a tremendously inspirational and insightful lesson about the real meaning of family. Thank you for writing the book. Thank you for everything you do to advocate for animals. And most of all, thank you so much for taking the time to appear on our show.
It's been such a pleasure. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much.
Our guest has been author and animal advocate Carlyn Montes De Oca, whose book, Junkyard Girl, A Memoir of Ancestry, Family Secrets, and Second Chances, is now available on Amazon and wherever books are sold. For more information about Carlyn and her work in the area of enhancing the animal-human bond, please go to her official website, animalhumanhealth.com. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time. Thank you to my producer, Steve Silver, my managers, Rick Marcelli and Robin Bragg Marcelli at the Marcelli Company in Hollywood, my director of programming, Robert Monaghan, my PR directors, Eileen Shapiro and Jimmy Starr, and my entire team at the XPTV1 network in the UK.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.